Hello there, and welcome to the work basement. My name is Adam, and I'm going to make some friends today.
Let's talk about heat for a second.
We have a lot going on here. First of all, this is a way better bevel jig than the other one that I have for a couple of reasons. It's got a smaller footprint, so it's easier to maneuver, and I've got a relatively short work rest, so I'm not hanging over the edge as much. This is easier to keep flat. Also, the C-clamp makes it easier to switch sides. All I've got to do to make sure that my plunge line is the same angle when I switch sides is make sure that my tip is the same height off of a flush surface. Now let's talk about heat. Leave it to me to learn grinding on stainless super steels. These things are hard, and I'm finding that the ceramic belts, no pun intended, just aren't cutting it. This 3M Cubitron is doing a significantly better job, so I'm happy paying a little bit more. These belts are $27 a piece, and the ceramics are maybe $10, but again, they're cutting way better. So on these steels at least, I'm happy to make that purchase. Now I'm generating heat in two places. Of course, in my knife, which I'm managing by dunking into my water bath, and two, in my platen. So a typical upgrade to manage knife heat is an external misting system. It's a flexible hose that mounts to the side that sprays water and air onto the blade to help keep it cool. And an upgrade for the platen is to get a carbide insert. It's very hard, it's very smooth, generates less friction. It also doesn't wear down. Mine is wearing pretty heavily. It's generating and storing a lot of heat in that platen. So in addition to a carbide insert, I was also curious if there are water-cooled platens with kind of an internal channel for running water. There are, but there are two problems. One, they're expensive, and two, they're designed for the typical size of a platen, which is 2 inches by 10. Mine is 2 inches by 8. So go figure, I'm going to have to figure something custom for my setup. But here are the positives. I've already got a small water pump, and if I get a misting system, it will come with some additional fittings. So if I buy a cheap plate of aluminum, surely there's a hot local single machinist in my area that can help me whip something up. I love solving problems. My work rest is only 8.5 inches wide, which isn't big enough to support my bevel jig on long blades because it tips over the edge and ruins my angle. So here I have a piece of G10 that I've just secured to my work rest to make sure that it's flat. The work rest that came with the grinder is just cheap coated steel. The coating was catching on a lot of things that I was using on the work rest, so I ended up sanding that flat. The problem is now that's rusting. So a permanent solution is probably just going to be a piece of aluminum with bolt holes to match. I'll just replace the work rest. But for the time being, this is working great. And when I need to do the left side, I'll just shift it over. I was planning on waiting until after this batch of knives was finished to make this grinder a little cooler, but I don't know if I can wait that long. This 20 CV steel is just so bloody tough. It's generating so much heat. I've already burned this knife, which isn't a huge deal because this is pre-heat treat. I can normalize this before it's hardened, but it's just too hot. It's no bueno. The platen is so hot I can't touch it. And the wheels all have little bits of burnt resin because the belt is melting. I might have to do this first. I realized pretty quickly that my heating problem might actually have been my mistake. I took everything apart to take measurements, and when I put it back together, I put the platen flush with the wheels. I did have it sitting out a little proud. I'd heard from a few makers that this is a good idea to make sure that the belt stays flat, but I think for me, that was just generating a lot of friction between the belt and the platen. This is just really crappy aluminum. This is working really well now. It's doing a really clean line on the ceramic belt. It is generating heat, of course, but nowhere near what it was doing before. I might still do the upgrades, but I think just the setup was really important. The 20 CV blades are looking good. I've got the bevels roughed in prior to heat treat to maybe a 50 or 60 thousandths edge thickness. I've heard you can go to about 30 or 40 with stainless, but I'm not quite comfortable doing that yet. I really don't want these to warp. I've got the flats ground to 120 grit ceramic, and I'm going to just polish that up a little bit more before heat treating. And the way to do that is with a different set of belts. So the Norton Blaze ceramics come in 36, 60, and 120 grits only. To go higher grit than the ceramic 120, I thought about using the J-Flex belts, but I decided to go with a different structured abrasive. These are the Norax. I've got 4 different ones here, and these are a structured abrasive like the Gator belts. So I've got angled horizontal grooves and 4 different grits. And I got overwhelmed and confused with the amount of options in the Norax belt until I had the genius idea of checking the brochure. And it turns out that grinding stainless on a platen, they recommend the 264. So Canadian Knifemaker Supply had them in stock. Here we are, let's give them a try. Here's the 120 grit ceramic finish. And there's the Norax X30. That did a great job. That'll save a lot of time hand sanding. But the one thing that I noticed was that out of the 4 belts, which is the X100, the 65, and the 45, these worked relatively quickly. It took about 2 or 3 minutes per belt. Wasn't too difficult, didn't make too much heat. But the last one, the X30, really loaded up with gunk. I think that I just ran it too fast, so I'll slow it down on the next one and see if that helps. These blades are finally ready to go to heat treat, which I'm really excited about. I've got 14 stainless blades and 5 high carbon Damascus, which are looking particularly good. With the stainless ones, they're going to be full tang, so I've got the pinholes drilled before they're hardened. I've got the flat surface ground and the bevels roughed in. And the last thing I'm waiting on before I send them out is a drill bit. This one here is going to be a gift for my buddy Josh Anderson, and I figured I'd throw in a sweet little Canadian mosaic pin, but it's a metric size, so I need a metric bit, to make sure it fits, and then these will be good to go. In the meantime, I'm going to get my grinding room clean and tidy. I'm going to get my paper knife profile stencils transferred over to 3mm G10. It's going to be a lot more durable than paper, so I don't have to keep remaking these, and it'll be easier to trace out onto steel. And I've also been accumulating quite a few belts. I think a better place for these is going to be on proper hooks somewhere over here. So I think I'll get 2 horizontal pieces of wood and some garage hooks and make it a little bit neater and cleaner. After 2 batches of knives, let's see how Dusty McDusterson is doing. That's a good couple inches deep. This is heavy. Very nice. So got 2 1x3s, a bag of hooks, and a bag of screws for $25. I'll take that any day of the week, especially Sunday, because that's what today is. Well, that's a little better. New ceramics, old ceramics, J-Flex, surface conditioning, honing. Sweet. In preparation for more hand sanding, this needs to get better. My Damascus blades came back from heat treat before the stainless because they're relatively easier, which is great, except for a little bit of delamination in this blank. As I'm surface grinding, these delamination spots are definitely moving, which is a good sign. They don't go all the way through. But the risk is I'm coming into my rough bevel, so I'm going to lose my centerline reference in terms of my flat spots up close by the spine. I think I'm going to just start grinding that full flat grind, and hopefully these come out. Because if not, unfortunately this blank is going to be toast.
So there were 3 in there. And that's the bottom of the curve. One's almost gone.
Jumping forward a couple hours, here we are hand sanded to a 400 grit finish. I've got the spine rounded. I've got the edge somewhere around 5 thousandths thick, which is enough to cut you still. And unfortunately, there are still multiple delaminations in this raindrop Damascus pattern that I wasn't able to grind out. So I'm not going to be able to sell this knife, but all is not lost. First and foremost, I've got a backup. This is the same model that I'm doing, the Stella, in a different Damascus pattern, which seems to be okay. Secondly, this was a great knife to learn on. So doing a huge knife like this with a full flat grind that turned out reasonably well, I'm pretty excited with how this turns out. And D, I think my sister is going to love one of my reject Damascus blades. Actually, holding this, the weight difference just on the flat grind is incredible. Let's weigh that. $226, and with the flat grind, 140. Wow, almost 100 grams less. Incredible. You really feel that. That's amazing. We'll be adding on a lot more weight on the handle, but it'll be on the back end, so that'll help with the balance. But wow, what a difference. That's like 40%. Crazy. Anywho, time to get this blade up to maybe a 1000 or a 1200 grit finish before I etch to reveal that Damascus pattern, and then rinse and repeat 3 times for these ones. Goodness. That is beautiful. Damascus knives are finished glue up. The Christie and the 2 Stellas turned out fantastic, and Debbie decided to take the day off and get drunk. As I was gluing it, the blade leaned to one side, and the epoxy set with a pretty nasty angle of the blade compared to the handle. And with how thin this is, I'm not going to be able to correct it with grinding because it will expose that internal channel. So I'm going to have to grind this off carefully without damaging the blade and start over. But these guys are looking mighty good. I'm pleasantly surprised with how this turned out. And I'm really glad I decided to redo the handle. I was worried that I might ruin the blade somehow and this whole piece would be trash. But not only was it relatively easy getting my workflow down pat, but I was able to go from the incredibly off-center blade to a new glue up all in under an hour. Which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you couple that with the fear of losing a Damascus blade, I'm pretty happy. So I got most of the wood off with the bandsaw, I got the rest with the grinder, and the only thing that I'm out is a new piece of brass because I was able to use one of the offcuts from a different blade. Safe to say, I'm extremely glad that I decided to fix this because it looks way better and I saved this piece. I've got my Damascus knives all finished. And the reason I was able to get these completed all the way before getting started on my stainless batch post heat treat is because Canada Post lost my package. and then went on strike. So just my luck, but rather than waiting for them to turn up, if they ever do, I've just purchased some more steel to basically restart this batch from scratch. And if the other ones turn up, great. If not, we have these ones. Second batch of stainless blades are back from heat treat, and massive shout out to Rob and Mitch from A&M Heat Treat in Mississauga. They do such a good job heat treating these. They're all individually Rockwell tested. They're sitting at 61. And if you'll notice, there's no scale on these because they have vacuum kilns. There's no oxygen to react with the steel as they're being hardened, which makes my life just so much easier. It's the same reason that you see a lot of guys wrap their stainless blades in foil, trying to reduce the amount of oxygen to reduce that scale. So next step is going to be finalize the bevels, polish up the flats, and get the handles on. Holy cannoli. This 20 CV steel at 61 Rockwell is bloody tough. To get from post heat treat to the primary bevels just on these 5 blanks took me 10 hours, which is mental. Probably a skill issue, but I would say my biggest bottleneck right now is heat management. It's really important not to overheat the edge because it'll ruin the temper. And I don't have anything set up on my grinder yet. That's coming. The misting system and the chilled platen. So I feel like I'm spending probably half my time dunking the blade in water just to keep it cool. So getting those upgrades done, I'm hoping will at least cut my time in half doing work like this because I can't do continuous grinding. But for now, it's difficult. These are going to make fantastic knives. They're going to cut really well for really long, but it is not easy to work with, I will tell you. Getting the primary bevel done on my last 20 CV blade, I've made the best kind of discovery, which is an accidental one. A push stick works significantly better than what I'm able to do with just my hands. And it's safer. Because after almost grinding off my fingernails, again, I'm no longer 3 millimeters away from the spinning wheels of pain. And it allows me to get a lot more pressure into the belt. So I'm doing one really hard pass and then dunking it in the water to cool it off. And where yesterday it was taking me probably 90 minutes to do the bevels on both sides of a blade this size, this has taken me less than 10. So just a significant improvement. This is basically just a poor man's version of the Tobin universal jig. And with how much grinding I plan on doing, it might be a good idea to pick one of those up. But for the time being, this is definitely the way to go. Oh, what a journey this has been, but a good one. And I'm pumped because I have these 4 knives now finished, and I'm really happy with how they turned out, and I'm extremely impressed with the edge that this steel took. It's just dangerous. But these are all 4 of the same model. I'm calling the Tim. It's a 12.5-inch chef's knife. And these 3 are going to be Christmas gifts for my 3 really good buddies, Elliot, Luke, and Mike. Elliot loves a black aesthetic, so I went with the black carbon fiber twill with an acid etch and a stone wash. Luke likes to cook in his nice bright kitchen, so I gave him a nice satin finish with a pop of turquoise. And Mike and his wife already have white knives, so I'm going to maintain the aesthetic to keep the boss happy, and hopefully he enjoys this gift. And then the 4th one, Josh, will get this shipped out to him in Montreal. Once these are good to go, then I've got to get the other knives in this batch finished. I just really wanted to prioritize the boys and get these done first. The others I have are my 2 models, the Simon and the Susie. They're going to be sold as a pair, and I have these resin handles infused with brass foil. Most of the work to get these done is pretty repetitive, so I'll just cut ahead to some final shots at the end here. But it turns out that despite being in a basement, I can make a pretty decent knife. So the next video is going to be a short one. I'm going to do some grinder upgrades, and then the fun begins.